So Fallout 76 is turning out to be more of a dumpster fire than I could have possibly guessed. And that doesn't even include the PR gaffes and downright greedy merch decisions. From glitches that have been around since the launch of Fallout 4, to whole new problems caused by copy-pasting Fallout 4 into an MMO, to banning people for using mods. This shows how far Bethesda has fallen. Banning people for using mods. Can you believe that? Mods are the one thing keeping Bethesda's ass out of the fire for this long. Or maybe, mods are the thing that led to this. I've said before that mods make game developers lazy. Considering the laziness and greed on display from Bethesda, I feel somewhat vindicated on that point. I also feel vindicated in saying that Fallout 4 was the point of no return for the Fallout series, and Bethesda as a studio. Issues found in Fallout 3 could be excused or even forgiven because it was a new formula. Fallout New Vegas showed it could be improved upon. It's only in retrospect that you realize the biggest improvements of story and roleplay have everything to do with having competent writers. Fallout 4 couldn't even manage that. Let's give a quick game review. Sound isn't much improved from Fallout 3. Sound effects might have a slight improvement, but music is more of the same. That goes both for radio music and atmospheric music. You'd think I would give points for a voice protagonist, but I won't. Lines are delivered no better or worse than any other NPC. Thankfully, Bethesda has not released a game with as many bad line reads as Oblivion. Thankfully, Bethesda has not released a game with as many bad line reads as Oblivion, so that's not a concern. While Fallout 4 is a visual upgrade, it's well behind its contemporaries. Textures in particular do not hold up well under any sort of scrutiny. Character animations are stilted and robotic. That's good for robots, not so good for humans. Facial animations are limited, with the angry sneering being both ridiculous and used too often. 1960s retrofuturism is a nice design and works well as a contrast with the bombed out rubble of after the war. Reused assets abound, not even unique weapons look unique. Weapon animations are also questionable. Every gun is modeled as left-handed, but function right-handed. Pipe weapons share animations even when they shouldn't. Most guns are grossly oversized. The story is Fallout 3 in reverse. It's more complicated, but not much more complicated. Coming after New Vegas, that's a huge disappointment. The factions of the Mojave were fleshed out with depth and logically fit the world. And the Commonwealth factions either have confusing or conflicting motivations. What does the Institute do after it wins? More experiments? Or are obvious but stupid? Fallout 4 is a halfway decent shooter. Controls are fairly tight, but issues with AI and terrain can make the action frustrating when shots bounce off invisible walls and pathing bugs out.
Turn up, dead. Fucking hide.
The base building had some major issues. The snapping and lack of precision, coupled with uneven, unalterable terrain, makes for a poor building sim. RPG elements are so bare as to almost be absent. All speech checks have been reduced to charisma-based percentage chances with no 100% guarantees. Skill checks are no longer a thing because skills are no longer a thing. I don't think I ever found a unique dialogue option because I had a particular perk. Limited dialogue options plagues the entire game. This massively limits the ability of the player to engage in roleplay. Perks are poor replacement for stats, but at least they aren't hot swappable. This game is painfully average. Beyond the name and the size, nothing really stands out. This is practically unforgivable for a AAA game. Laziness is the name of the game when it comes to Bethesda titles. Why make something with depth or functions correctly when you can crank out the bare minimum as quickly as possible? Using the same engine over and over usually means a team can focus on utilizing it to the max and crafting a better story and world. It's almost the opposite in this case. The world is bigger than ever, but the glitches and issues are piling up. I think there are fewer named NPCs per square mile than Fallout 1. And they often have less dialogue. Improvement of and emphasis on twitch shooting exacerbates the poor terrain modeling and brain-dead AI. Bethesda seems to simply pile on without improving. I think too much success has made them lazy.
Peace has cost you your strength. Victory has defeated you.
A couple of things really stuck with me. I learned how practically impossible it is to do a pacifist run. MacLeod must die. It is a bit of a harsh departure from the other entries. MacLeod isn't even a final boss. Fallout 4 doesn't even have a final boss. Maybe if you kill the Brotherhood, Elda Maxon could be considered a final boss, but it's a stretch. Fewer and fewer problems can be solved with anything other than violence, from the originals to 3 to 4. This was bound to happen with the transition to first-person shooter, but it seems to be getting worse. More importantly, New Vegas was the opposite. A lot can be done with skills beyond hacking a computer and deactivating turrets. A grand final battle is satisfying, but convincing your opponent was not only wrong to oppose you, but convincing them that their very ideology is doomed to failure is fantastic. Second is the one thing that really stuck out to me in Fallout 3. My favorite mission was Big Trouble in Big Town. For those that don't know, east of Vault 101 is a town built out of the wreckage of a suburb with a bunch of cookie-cutter homes. In the center of the houses is a makeshift wall surrounding most of the center area. A makeshift bridge crossing a makeshift moat leads into the inhabited area, where a distracted guard notices you and stops you. This is Big Town, the place where the adults from Little Lamplight are forced to go. Things are bad. All the residents are interesting people, but they display obvious developmental problems, likely due to the unique culture of Little Lamplight. They lack resources and survival skills. Super mutants raid them often, and recently wounded one and captured two. You're tasked with rescuing them and helping them defend themselves from any future attacks. One of the biggest things that stood out to me was every NPC in that town was named and had a unique personality. This includes the extra character Sticky, which can be found and escorted from Little Lamplight. I felt some sort of connection for those characters. This was to the point that I gave them all unique armor and weapons based on their personality and job. I originally played Fallout 3 on console, so I had to gather every piece of equipment and reverse pickpocket it onto each character. Thankfully, 3 of the characters were companions, so you could trade with them easily. I agonized over the best way to have them defend themselves and lamented I couldn't choose more than one. I spent way too much time attempting to spawn an unnamed trader that mentions the success of Big Town after your actions and to make their way there and become a permanent resident. So I was very excited for the base building in Fallout 4. Rebuilding after the apocalypse is something I wanted explored more in the series. New Vegas was almost too far along in rebuilding. Coupled with my love of the Big Town quest, I was ready for this feature. My disappointment for what I got was immense. The Minutemen are such a bland faction, and despite becoming the leader, you never feel in control of its actions. The base building itself had major problems and limitations, but worse is the fact that it had little to no impact on the game in any way. It was just a distraction. Finally, every settlement besides a select few just have generic NPCs with no name and no personality. I'm not saving people. I'm saving a bunch of clones with limited dialogue. I often imagined becoming the mayor of Big Town as being what my character did after having their adventures. I don't have to imagine what being the leader of the Minutemen is. It's boring and limited. I remember first exiting Vault 101. The designers really built up to that moment. Despite the green haze, it was a fantastic moment. It was a whole new world to explore, and the game very much wanted you to explore it. The main quest was a quest with your dad being the MacGuffin. Discovery was the major theme for Fallout 3, with sub-themes of growing up, literally, passing the torch, and corruption and infection. I remember first entering New Vegas. The story writers really built up to that moment. New Vegas was almost literally an oasis in the desert. Civilization in a wasteland. Civilizational conflict was the major theme for New Vegas, with revenge being a sub-theme. I remember returning to Sanctuary after the bomb. I realized how similar this was to Fallout 3. Getting power armor and fighting a Deathclaw in the first 5 minutes didn't help with that. What are the themes of Fallout 4? Fish out of water discovery and ideological blindness leading to conflict are the main two. That is way too similar to 3 and New Vegas. Worse, it's all done worse. A voice character with a fixed backstory could have had a lot to say about the world that was and now is. You get one interview with a reporter about it and that's it. The Railroad is such a dumb faction. Why don't they help normal people or forge ties to other organizations or have some sympathy to the paranoid wastelanders? I don't know. They don't really explain it. Meanwhile, Caesar will talk your ear off about how his civilization is organized and why. How much effort does it take to write a paragraph explaining the motivation behind a faction and why they help or don't help some and not others? Too much for Bethesda, I guess. They need to overcome this laziness that has infected their studio, or I suspect they may not be developing games for much longer.